So glad that everybody could show up today. It's wonderful. It's kind of impromptu putting in the group. So we have some of my students from other certifications in here, as well as those who are doing my MAT certification. So we got different, different, some, teaching now. I know, Tatiana, you're almost done. You have to test out and do your practical. It's great to have everybody here today. It's been a while. All right, so we are here for our queuing and Pilates classes, right? And everybody knows me. And then the second, I have the recording going. So in the moment, I'll just go through like the little introduction process for those that are going to watch the video after and watch the recordings. So does anybody have any questions or anything for me before we get started? All right. It's good to see everybody. All right, no questions. And just to put it out there, there is the chat's here, so you can always use the chat. And if you have any questions or anything, you can put it in there, and feel free to unmute yourself as well and ask whatever question you are. So, feel free to stop me. It should take about an hour for this particular presentation, and so hopefully we'll have a little participation with everybody, and definitely by all means ask questions, because if you're teaching already, it's good to have a little insight on if there's any situations going on with you that you may have encountered during your teaching. All right, let's see. Oh, Miss Body, yes, a hurricane. Yeah, that's how's that going down there? No, I do not miss living in
Yeah,
a hurricane place.
we're still recovering, and then Nicholas came through and dropped some more rain on us. So I lost power at my house, so I'm someplace else right now. So I don't have all my equipment, but I'm like, I need to be in this class, so I'm
Right.
here.
Good, good. Yeah, it's just, yeah, we're just talking and stuff today. So it's definitely lecture more so than no moving or anything like that. So the power of lecture is always a good thing. And I know you guys have been, through my certifications already. So like we've talked about this stuff before, but it's good to always like have that reminder, and, because you never get things everything on the first time around when you're learning. So again, I'm glad you're safe, Sandrell, and hopefully staying dry. I used to live in Florida, so know all about living through hurricanes. All right, so let's get started. So welcome, thank you for coming. It's so nice to see everybody here today, and we are going through Pilates, or queuing for Pilates classes and exercises, and just kind of navigating how that's going to work when you get into teaching, or if you're teaching already, like navigating any things that may come up if things are not maybe landing with your students, or you're ready to take them into different places. Right. Just a quick note though, you more than welcome to have if you're in a quiet room, to not mute yourself and have it open and be able to talk and like interact. So I definitely encourage interaction during this time, to ask questions about any of the concepts or things that are brought up. And always just reminding you that everything that we're going over in these workshops are tools to put in your toolbox. Nothing is steadfast and hard that you have to do something this way. These are just tools to help you navigate your road to teaching, things that may come up during teaching as well. So things we'll have to go over today, right? Define that purpose of what queuing is, teaching large groups, types of queuing, verbal queuing, visual queuing, and hands-on queuing. All right, so queuing Pilates, right? Students learn in several different ways, and queuing methods can be diverse, as I was saying. Like, these are just your tools that you're going to have in your toolbox. Typically, people are either verbal learners, they can hear, auditory, you can tell them something, they're going to go right for it and do it, or they're visual learners, they need to see it happen before they can attempt it themselves, or they're tactile learners, where they really do need somebody to get on them, touch them, and show them where to go during the exercise. And we'll dive a little more into that in a moment. All right, so what's the purpose of queuing? Right? I mean, without queuing, our students obviously wouldn't be moving if we can't tell them what we want. right? So definitely as part of it is grabbing their attention, a way to connect with our students, building awareness within our students and ourselves, right? So us paying attention to our students, directing movement, eliciting a response from them, and hopefully it's the one that you want. And then keep time and pace. Cueing can definitely do that. Telling people, and we'll talk about action words in a moment. And then it's, you're explaining what the exercise is and the reasons why behind it, all those different concepts that come up when you're taking somebody through an exercise, especially on the explanation part. Sometimes students are a little bit hesitant or obstinate, and you have to go into a deeper explanation to get them where you want them to go. All right. So teaching large groups. One thing that I get asked all the time is like, how do you get a group of people moving in unison? Well, it takes a little practice, and it all comes down to your cueing and how you deliver things to make that happen, especially when everybody is at different levels in a class. And I believe, to me, all classes, no matter what level, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever they're going up to, your numbers, they're all levels regardless, because one person's level 1 is not the same as another person's, right? So teaching those large groups, excuse me. And it's, something, it's a great thing that does require a lot of dedication. It is a skill that can be learned on how to do this for sure, but you have to be able to analyze. The first thing that comes though is practice, right? You really do have to know the work. You can't teach somebody something that you don't know. And I'm not saying that you always have to be able to perform something, but it is a good way to really get it into your body, to be able to try it, even if you maybe aren't successful at completing the full choreography that was laid out, say in the classical method. It's okay, but you tried it, and then there goes into that analyzing thing afterwards, like, well, how did I feel in this? What happened? What's keeping me from doing it? And going a little deeper into those things that are happening within yourself makes it a lot easier to translate to another person. And there's also, when it comes to practices, a way of finding inspiration, right? Within all of the things that you found within yourself, maybe that's what you're going to focus on when you're teaching your students and cueing them. Maybe you're cueing them from that place of your discovery within yourself. And then experiencing what the students are doing does also help you program your class, knowing what they may be feeling or how challenging something may be, or what words might have landed with you when you tried something and during your practice. Maybe that was with another teacher that was teaching. Maybe that verbal cue that landed and made something solidify in your head and your body is something that you bring out into your students as well. Right. And this is just that, as all of it comes down to in that practice thing, is just pay attention, and pay attention from all angles and multiple levels. The more information you absorb during this time, the easier it's going to be to translate it to all the different people that come into your classes. Right, so the next part is observation. So this reason why Pilates is made up of all of these things: self-practice, observation, practice teaching, all of these things, because they do play into each other. So observing, right, see how teachers start their class, and not just observe, like, so when you get to watching, right, you're seeing how they're starting their class, how they're relating to their students or not relating to your students, right, could go either way, depending on their style of teaching. And then, are the students moving with the cues that the teacher's giving, or are they not? Like, is it turning into a hot mess? Like, notice all of those things when you're observing is going to help you take it into your classes and try to keep that fluidity within your class, or knowing when to break and stop and have a conversation with your students and break in the class as well, right? And then, are you cueing? Are the cues direct, or are they hidden? Like, is there a lot of language surrounding what they want that person to do? Or are they being very direct? Lift up your right hand, right? Touch your head. It's very direct. There's not much for like explanation in there. I mean, you could be very precise and be like, okay, touch your head on the backside, or here or there, right? You can definitely get a little more into it when it comes about, are they being direct or are they being hidden with what they're saying, right? And oftentimes when something's a little more hidden and buried in their language, the students might not even be moving at that point, right? And then you reflecting all of this, everything you do in your self practice, practice teaching, observation, you want to reflect on all of these moments. And it's really good to do it as close to when you were doing those other activities so that it's fresh in your brain. But you want to draw from your own experience, as I was saying earlier, get feedback from your students is really great. Like after the class, like maybe go to that student that you have a good rapport with and like ask for their feedback on how they felt during a particular exercise. And it's always good to be pretty specific when you ask for certain feedbacks too, because if you knew that something wasn't landing in class or somebody had troubles with something or somebody did really, really well with something or had an aha moment, like it's really good to like ask them, like, what was it that I said that like really clicked with you that made that happen? So you know that what you're doing is working or not working. And then that's asking, that students, right? So what was that challenging part, right? And then practicing the cues, right? So going after all of this and practicing everything that didn't land or did land and see how you can maybe improve upon something if it didn't work for you during class and things may have turned into a hot mess. And pay attention to how you pulled it out, like, of that hot mess too. So you can use that next time. And it starts to
Nicola,
just
I have
come.
a question.
Mhm. Yes.
So like on the topic of like it turning into a hot mess, since I started doing my observation hours, I've noticed that some teachers kind of keep like a note with them. I
Mhm.
don't know how you feel about that. It's like, is that a good, idea to do? Or they
Well,
basically
when
have
you,
like a notes section where they kind of like maybe under roll up, they have a specific cue that they know works. So is it okay to reference notes during a class?
I have my ups and downs about notes. So having a note just to prompt you is good. But if you have a whole list of notes that's basically your whole class, then I've seen some teachers do it too, and they'll just be looking at the notes the whole time and not paying attention to their class. So I mean, like using the notes as a crutch and working to get away from it is going to be a better thing because then your attention is not on the paper, your attention is on the students. And that also comes to knowing your work, knowing the exercises, knowing all of that stuff is going to make it a lot easier because oftentimes, even when you have a plan, the class doesn't typically go as you have wanted it to go because you never know who's going to come into your class. But there's having the notes, having a quick reference for something like that is okay to have, but not something that you should rely on for like every single class that you have, because ultimately you do start to look a little unprofessional during the class, and then your students may lose confidence in you because they might think that you don't know the material, you don't know your stuff, as well as you're not paying attention to them for safety and those things that are going to come into play, especially if you're using equipment, props, and stuff like that and worrying about people and their positioning. And especially if you're getting more towards the advanced exercises with people, they start to get in more compromising positions. So at that point, if you got to check their notes to make sure something, whatever, when they are upside down, it's not going to look good. Right. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, in the beginning, okay, but starting to move away from it. And then sometimes I'll have notes too, like, but usually it's just like literally like one word, like, because it's for the order of the exercises that I was choosing. But that's usually about it. All right. And then, so, I mean, you can finish that, like, right, yeah, reflection on everything for us teaching those large groups and getting them moving. The biggest takeaway for me is getting them moving as quickly as possible. All right. So thinking outside and thinking inside. So when you're cueing, you can go to what we call external focus of attention. So you're referencing things that are outside of somebody's body so that they have familiar landmarks at this time. And that for beginners typically is easier for them to grasp new concepts when you reference familiar things, the mat, the floor, the wall, the ceiling, right, are external things that they can rely upon and like say, okay, I know where the wall is. It makes it a lot easier than saying, okay, lift your eyes up to your the crown of your head, or I mean, yeah, it's familiar, but you're thinking about like a little more internal with their different functions within their body. All right, so it connects to those familiar landmarks. And then when you're thinking on the inside, this is one thing that's very familiar with Pilates, because we can get very granular, we can get really inside of the different minute movements within an exercise and overthink things. So this is where it's called an internal focus of attention. And this is where a good place to go after you've got them maybe moving, you got them in that external stuff, like, okay, push, let's say a good one, like squeeze that magic circle. Well, they got the magic circle, they're squeezing it, it's an external item that's not their body, right? Instead of saying engage your inner thighs, you said squeeze that magic circle. They're going to use their inner thighs if they squeeze the magic circle, right? And it's in between. So that's giving that external. So internally would be squeezing, use your inner thighs, squeeze your inner thighs, right? So with that, it doesn't also allow somebody to refine their movements, and those people that are looking to dive deeper into the work, an internal focus is a good thing. And you can use both of them in tangent, right? You can use them during the same exercise. So there's definitely those words of thought, people will think that, oh, you only need to use external. You need to use both, right? Both come into play. We are internal, we are beings. So it's good to have both. But the biggest thing with both of these is not to get hung up on perfection. And you're wanting your students to move. And I will say that many times throughout this presentation, you do want to not get hung up on perfection. As long as the people aren't hurting themselves and doing things like that, then it's okay. All right, so here's just some examples of this internal and external focus of attention. All right, so saying in a phrase like, I'll read the first one. It's going to be, this is external focus of attention. Lie down on your back, bend your knees 90 degrees, and place your feet on the floor. And you could even dumb it down even more and make it simpler, is lie on your back, place your feet on the floor. There's only so many places you can go between there when you can place your feet on the floor when you're lying on your back, right? It just instinctually, you're going to go to bent knees with your feet on the floor if you're lying on your back. So it's very simple, very precise, and you're referencing, like, you can say lie on your floor, but you definitely want to let them know, of course, which direction, up or down. All right, so now you could even say lie down facing upwards. Then they know up is up, right? That'll make it even more external because you're referencing something up. Lie on your back, look at the ceiling, right? So making it internal, makes it a lot more flowery, maybe a little more words, as you see in the other paragraph. We're going to gently bend our knees and have a seat on our mats, and then lie down on our sides and move onto our backs with our knees bent. Next, place your feet on the floor and pull them next to your buttocks. So that's getting more into the internal. So if you started with the external and said, lie down face up, looking at the ceiling, and put your feet on the floor, if they don't go to where you want them to go, then you can start adding in all those internal things and getting them a little more positioned into place. But typically, most people are going to go where you want them to go right away. Okay, so another example of that external focus of attention, right? Come into a plank on top of your reformer. It can be your mat as well, with your hands on the foot bar and your feet at the shoulder blocks. So as for those reformer instructors in the room, right? Pretty simple. Hands are on. You got an external focus. They're on the foot bar. Feet are at that shoulder blocks here. And slowly push the reformer open and pull it closed, which you could even say, stretch the springs out and then bring the springs back to normal, right? Would be another way to add a little more external into that. And then the internal side of that would be place your hands one at a time on the foot bar, and then place your heels at the shoulder blocks. Come into a plank, brace your core, grip tightly with your hands, and then on the exhale, push the reformer open with your feet and pull back to the stoppers and the lats. Like, there's so many words in that, and I've heard teachers do it, and I know I can be guilty of things like that too sometimes, but it's how long is it going to take for them to get moving? Pretty it's going to take a lot longer than the other way, right? And so hopefully that's kind of landing with you on the thought process of the internal and the external. Internal typically is going to be less words, focusing on external things around within the room with and familiar things, more so than just all the little granular small things that need to happen, right? It's like, let's say an example, how everybody knew we can do it with our hands since we're all here. All right. So I'm going to think on the external focus. Raise your right hand. I shouldn't do it. And make a fist. Easy, right? So on an internal focus, okay, bend your elbow, lift your hand next to your face. Now I want you to curl your fingers, then your hand, right? Cross your thumb over the top is going to be a little more external, right? I'm like describing all of those little movements that need to happen when all I had to do is say, raise your right hand, make a fist, right? Most people know how to do these things. So I think not overthinking it. Like you think about a 2-year-old, you know, they know how to get up and get down. They know how to sit. They know how to stand, right? So it's pretty easy to give them those minimal cues, right? Because most people know how to do those things. So they're not overthinking it. Okay. All right. So this comes back to this. A picture's worth 1,000 words, but it only takes one word to tell someone to sit, right? You don't have to bend your knees, get down on the floor. You can just say sit. People will sit. They sit on the floor to make it a little more external so they know exactly where they should sit, of course. All right, so types of cueing. There are several different types of cueing. This is by no means an exhaustive list because it really does just depend on the type of teaching that you're doing, on the cues and prompts that you will utilize, of course. So if you're teaching a workshop, it might be a little different than teaching just a regular group class or a private on what you're going to use. Now, so verbal cueing. Right, it's basically what we're doing right now. Say, lift your hand, make a fist. This is a verbal cue. You did it, you moved, right, for that. So with the verbal cues, you can name anatomical parts, glutes, hamstrings. So we're getting away from the focus of attention and just some of the different types of cues. But, you know, naming anatomical parts of the body, direction. So up, down, left, right, forwards, backwards, inferior, superior, all those good things. You can focus names of planes of motion. So in a setting with teachers or people that know anatomy, you can reference planes of motion during that time to get them to do exactly what you want them to do, right? And then sensory cues as well is a good way to get them to understand maybe what they might be feeling, because I know everybody, and you can raise your hand too if you've been teaching a class or you've been in a class, and you're like, where am I supposed to feel it? Like, how many people asked you that? Well, you might be feeling it here, right? Because you honestly, you can have an idea of what somebody might be feeling, but there's no way to actually know, right? Because everybody is different. But definitely, if you're doing crunches and you're working the abs, you're like, should I feel it there? Of course, right? We all know that because that's the muscle that we're primarily utilizing, right, during that time. Right. And then imagery, right? It is a great tool to elicit an action to pull something out. So it's like spread your arms like eagle wings, right? Lifting up, right? Arch your spine like a swan. So different imagery can pull out. But this is a big one where I say you have to read your room and know your crowd. You want to make sure you use images that are going to relate to the people there. Like it'd be pointless to reference water polo to somebody that doesn't even know how to swim, or maybe has never even been in a pool before, or even know what a polo is. So you definitely want to reference the proper things for the crowd, the age group, maybe gender, demographic, whatever that might be that's going to land with your crowd, so that your point gets across. And then next part is explanatory. So explaining things to people, which is something that can be utilized more when you're trying to dive deeper into a concept to give explanations why behind a particular move or whatever you happen to be doing. So you're just diving deeper. And then visual demonstration. Visual and demonstration, those are two different things because are two and one and the same. So maybe they're a visual learner, they need to see something happen. So it's kind of like show and tell. and you're talking and doing at the same time. And the demonstration doesn't necessarily have to be you doing it, and we'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But then the next one would be tactile, hands-on cueing, whether it's tactile with you touching them or them touching themselves. And this tactile cueing can be assistive, it can be resistive, like giving them resistance. It can be, you can stretch somebody. It can also give them feedback onto what they're feeling, like acupressure, or even just touching somebody on the, like say if you're doing roll-ups or even sit-ups, right? So, right, we will sometimes hold people's feet. And sometimes it's not even necessary to actually really hold their feet. It might just be enough to touch and lightly, and they will be able to do the sit-up even perfectly fine. But without your hands giving that light touch on top to push down, they can't do the sit-up. So having that feedback is very useful for the brain. And then building awareness comes from that as well. So you may have any questions about those before I move forward. I'm going to talk a little more about them. All right. Good. All right. So verbal cueing. As we know, it's speaking, some sounds so people can hear. Biggest thing, you want to speak clearly. Definitely clearly so everybody can hear you in the back of the room as well, if it's a big room. And then you want to use fewer words, as we showed earlier, how using the external focus of attention when starting off and teaching somebody is going to allow you to use fewer words when you talk, and being very direct, of course. And then also speaking at a moderate pace. So if you speak too fast or too slow, I don't know, how's everybody, you can raise your hand. Have you seen, what's the movie, it's the one with The Rock. It's not the jungle, oh, it's Jumanji. So the last Jumanji movie where they were in, yeah, it was the last one, right? So Milo, the Danny Glover's character, he talks really slow, right? So what was the thing that happened? Like he was like, I always knew I was going to die because he talks too slow, because he couldn't get it out, and everybody dies because he can warn them quick enough, right? So he was a bad zoologist in that one. So the same thing goes with classes, like knowing the pace of your voice. If you talk too slow, then people are going to be hanging in that exercise, right? Nobody wants to be sitting in a teaser for 5 minutes because you haven't gotten to the next part, right? And then they're just wanting to get them moving as quickly as possible is a big thing. So that goes right back to the external focus of attention, and the few words gets them moving fast. And then that's when you can use all of that time. You've got them moving. Now you can start talking about the cueing concepts, getting more into your explanations about things, and getting them to the next exercise, right? So it's like they're your puppet at this point. All right, so speaking, so what to cue? Like during this time, like I definitely have students who are like, okay, well, I don't know what to cue. Like you just lose your brain about like, because you got them moving, you got them in exercise. Now what do I talk about? Because you don't always have to talk, right? Sometimes it's good to observe and just, let your students give you the cues that they need, because oftentimes, like maybe they need to straighten their legs more, or maybe they need to engage their core deeper, squeeze their glutes, whatever that might happen to be, to give them that cue to be a little more efficient and like achieve the exercise. So it's like thinking about those things, right? You can here's a great list, and I do have, there's an article on my website that I can post with this as a thing, but just here's not an exhaustive list of just things to pull from. So that, I mean, there's so many, like breath, right? You can talk about their position. You can talk about the different angles of pull, like when it comes to equipment or props, like thinking about what should be articulating, what should be stable, mobile, what's tight or loose, that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of things to draw from to cue. And you can make your whole class built around this. You can make, okay, today we are really going to focus on breath. And every single exercise, breath is going to be what we talk about. or core engagement, or we're going to focus on mobility, the mobility within every exercise, because every exercise in Pilates is moving, right? So there's some kind of mobility that needs to take place. So maybe that's going to be your biggest cueing focus during exercises, and let all that other stuff go. Right? So then focus on that one thing. And then next time you come back, maybe do another. You could do all of the same exercises in like 20 different classes, but have a different cueing focus and bringing their brain to that, right? And then all of that just comes together and makes a big great thing, right? Because everybody's like, oh, I got that concept. I can breathe, I can move, I can engage. And then like everything really does come together. So the next part is talking about what words to use. So action words. And these action words that we're about to talk about are talking more on the external focus of attention side to get them moving and moving quickly, right? Because our verbal cues do rely heavily on our vocabulary and the words that we know, but slowly, like move slowly, right? Push this away, pull this towards you, right? Lift it up off the floor, right? That kind of stuff. So it's going to like give them a reference into what they might be doing to maybe an external object, but it also, you got to push, something's going to push away, right? I'm going to push the floor away in my plank so that I can have that protraction of my scapula, right? And have a nice wide back. So it gives me that external focus to push. And then you can start refining it. And like I said, you can use these within every exercise. You can go back and forth, starting with that external and then moving to the internal as well. And if they're like a super advanced class, then maybe you're diving even deeper into some of the internal stuff because they like want that extra. But they already know all the other stuff. You could tell them the exercise name and they'll get right into it. So you don't have to think as much on that side. And then, so these are towards the internal focus of attention for somebody. Lengthen your spine by contracting your transverse, right? So cinch that waist and lengthen your spine. Flex your hip to 90 degrees, right? Which is tabletop. Would be like more of like external thought process of tabletop. And then straighten your elbows, squeeze your buttocks. Those are all going to be more on the internal side because you're focusing on their ability for their brain to make their muscles to contract versus, like I said earlier with the magic circle, squeeze the magic circle. Or you could be like engage your inner thighs, would be more internal. All right. Does anybody have any questions about the internal, external cueing stuff? All right, good. All right, so next part is going to be visual or demonstrating and cueing for people. So sometimes, right, these people, this is going to be more like the type of student who is probably going to be the last person moving in your class. Like you're like, everybody's going and they're looking around, they're going to be looking at their neighbor. And which in my classes, I'm like, don't look at your neighbor, right? Whenever I'm like actually in person with people, because I want them to listen to me or watch me versus their neighbor, because they might have the one neighbor that never does what you tell them to do. Because I definitely have had students in my classes who they'll be doing their whole own thing, or they want to do extra reps, and you're like, okay, don't look at that person, because then the whole class gets off and it turns into a hot mess, right? And then so demonstrating and cueing, right? You can mimic, right? The move, like you're a conductor, especially with your arms, are very useful so that you don't have to do the work. And then, or you can, if you're on the mat, it's easy enough to get down and demonstrate an exercise. But as a teacher, we use our bodies a lot. So sometimes you just don't want to demonstrate, right? You want to save your body, especially if you're teaching a bunch of classes during the week. And then have another student demonstrate it. It's always one of the best things, because then they feel like extra, like, oh, wait, I got it good, right? So they get to be put up on that pedestal a bit. And then demonstrate within your client's range of motion. So we all know, our abilities. That's one reason why I personally don't like demonstrating, because, or if I do, I definitely stick to their range of motion so they can see what it's going to look like more like when they do it versus when I do it. And then big thing too, don't kick them off their equipment. don't steal their props to show them how to do something. Like that's like the last resort because it's going to change the flow of your class, having to take things from them. And then of course, COVID these days, and germs, you don't want to share stuff with people. And they're sweating all over their equipment. Nobody wants that. And so some students just need to see it, right, before they can do it. And unfortunately, some of them don't even get it and then you're on to the next exercise before. So in that case, as a teacher, as I was saying before, when you're teaching, you want to pay attention because when you see that visual learner and they're not even starting the exercise and everybody's halfway done, then maybe that's that time where you say, hey, let's do a second shot. Like we'll do 2 sets of this instead, right? And it's okay. You can do a whole class like that, 2 sets of every single exercise, right? Makes your job easier. And they're more likely to get it if they're having trouble with something because they get 2 shots. All right, so hands-on and tactile cueing. This is my last resort when it comes to teaching. And I don't know with you all if you're even able to do hands-on now for those that are teaching and getting out around folks. Tell me, are you guys able to do that yet? Anybody know? I know you're teaching, Mary. I'm sure.
So I haven't gotten to that part as of yet. And so I just basically do more verbal and demonstration, and they usually get that. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. I think everybody's having to flex that a lot more these days. Right? Not yet for you, Sandra. Yeah, because we have to. You have it like opens up a whole different part of your brain being forced to not be able to use it, right? Or touch. For sure. All right, so this person, the kind of person, like when it comes to hand tactile cueing for me, like it's typically my last resort, even without a pandemic, just because one, it takes your attention away from the whole class, right? Because you got to go to this person, your eyes are on this person, you're touching that person, and who knows who's doing what on the other side of the room because you're not paying attention, right? It's kind of like texting and driving. You're paying attention to your phone and not driving. So I try do my best unless they have to absolutely just can't get it any other way for me to start putting hands on. But if it is a private setting, now it's a whole different subject versus a group class. In a private setting, the hands-on it's happening a lot usually. So because they get a little more attention, right? So step back, something's going on, go over, touch, right? Step back. And sometimes they just need somebody close to them at all times, depending on what it is. So there's that side of it as well. All right, but this person, the person that typically you're going to be doing hands-on, like in a group class, they're typically the person that's a little more disconnected from their body. They might not be able, like you say, lift your right hand, they might lift their left hand kind of person, so that you need to be over there to help them and touch them. Or on the flip side, they're going to be the person that needs a lot more support or they want to dive deeper, right? So it's going to be your way of giving them a little extra to help them get more into an exercise that they're trying to achieve as well. Right, so hands-on cueing is very, very powerful, and it'll get them where you want them a lot faster than talking, that's for sure. Now, I like to have people do self-palpation is a good way. So teaching them where to touch, when to touch. Where you would touch them, right? When you would do it, it can often be times just useful. And then, and I'll dive a little more into some of this hands-on stuff in just a second. But then you can also utilize props for where you may have would be touching them. Like if you're going to on their ankles, like in a traditional Pilates mat, there's a strap. So you can put that strap over your ankles and do your roll-ups all day long during that time, or using bands, wrapping them around something so that you don't have to be the one that goes over there and does that. Right? And then that saves you for the other students if you're in a group class as well, so you can continue walking around. But the big thing when you do touch somebody, you want to use 2 hands, right? Flat palms, so you don't want to poke people with your fingernails. Right? So flat palms, pad of your hand, and a 2-hand touch. So let's see if I got something. It's probably the best thing. I'll use my book. I was going to use my Mike and Ike's, but I'll use a book, right? So if I was going to two-hand, like I say this was somebody's thigh, this is somebody's foot, I want to be able to hold the thigh, the whole shin, the knee area, and the foot when they're moving so that I can get that squeeze, I can get that push and pull, I can feel where both they're going, and it's a lot more supportive. They can feel your confidence, and they're less likely to overpower you if you use two hands. Because you don't want them to do that, because they will like push you away when you say push, and they'll like kick you off, and you're like, whoa. So yeah, you definitely want to communicate during that whole time when you're doing this with them. All right. Let's see. So still talking about our hands-on cueing. What's the first thing? I'm gonna have somebody call it out. I probably should change it back. What's the first thing you do before touching somebody?
Ask for permission.
Yeah.
Ask permission. Yes.
Mhm.
And
Can I touch you?
huh? Yeah, ask permission every time. I know there's different rules that people have different thought processes on when and how, and with the asking, I've had been around some teachers that are like, well, I asked them once, then that means it's okay all the time. No, every time, right? Every time you touch, you want to ask, and you want to tell them where you're going to be touching them and going in. Here I go, right? I'm going to touch you on your hips. I'm going to touch you here. And just being mindful of where you touch them. You always want to give them warning, because there are people that have traumas and different things going on, and you don't want to be grabbing people around their neck, or some different places in their body, or putting things between their legs, or spreading their legs, right? So you really do want to be mindful of any like trauma that somebody may be having during this time, and just let them do it. Like for me, like when it comes to putting balls between people's legs, like here you go, you can put it between your legs yourself, and then that frees you up to help somebody else as well. And it also gives them power, right? It gives them control over their practice. And the more you can do that as a teacher, the better, right? That's one reason why hands-on typically is my last, because my goal as a teacher is to make them self-sufficient, just like a parent, right? You want that kid to be a self-sufficient, sustainable human being so you can kick them out of the house and they're not living with you when they're 35. So that's exactly what it's like when they're being a teacher. You want to give them the tools, and so that when they grow, right, you can just call out that exercise name and they're in it, right? They come in, they get their props already, they know what they're going to need. So you want them to become self-sufficient, and then you get to be the director and the conductor. Right? So things to avoid touching somebody when they're in a balancing kind of place, because especially if you don't tell them, but you want to make sure you don't make them lose their balance, especially if they're on top of a piece of equipment, or they're got one foot up off the air. Just letting them know if they need support, like, hey, they can put their hand on your shoulder, or blah, 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 just to like what's going to help you stay balanced. And that's also where I talk about like having the two-hand situation is always good, so that you can balance yourself with that person and they don't overpower you. And staying with that, just to note, is to be mindful that touch transfers energy, right? So, and it can transfer feelings, emotions, like say maybe you're not confident with your touch. That's one of the biggest things, being confident. Or maybe you don't want to touch somebody. That gets transferred to them. When you touch like somebody, we all know it's like when you don't want to touch, it's like picking up like somebody else's gum that's under the table, and it's like, I don't want to touch it. That's exactly what they'll feel, right? When they'll feel that you don't want to touch them, that you're hesitant to touch them when you go in. So you definitely want to be confident, and that's one reason why it's always good to talk and tell them what you're going to do, when you're going to do, how pressure is going to be when you touch somebody, and creating that rapport and that relationship. All right. Make sure I got all those. Placing hands on, verbal cues. Oh, here we go. Warming your hands, because I know sometimes I have cold hands. This makes me a better chocolatier, have cold hands. But warming the hands up, letting them, know, or even just letting them know your hands are cold is always going to be a good thing too. All right, I know we're moving towards the end. We're getting there. All right. So another one with hands-on cueing. You want to start off gently. So some people are very susceptible to touch. Some people bruise easily. Sometimes touch can be painful. So people with fibromyalgia are very sensitive. People who have going through chemotherapy, like their nerves may be just on fire, and might not tell you, right? So it's always just to go in gently, right? It's like thinking about gout, like there's the when the feet, right? Just the tiniest touch is like excruciatingly painful. So you really do want to be mindful of those kinds of things when you are touching people, not to like push, be hard and squeezing, unless that's necessary. But you definitely want to ask them, of course, how is that okay? Right? Just like when you get a massage, people are like, how's that pressure, right? And giving imagery, anatomical cues, directional cues, and everything, and just letting them know what's happening during that process. And another part is not to push them past what they can do. When the body usually will tell you when it's can't go any further. Like when you're stretching somebody, like it'll be like stop, right? So just really listening to the body and not pushing them past. And noticing their face and all their expressions and things that are going on when you get into that touch. And the biggest takeaway from this for me is work within your scope of practice. Practice on somebody that you trust and that trusts you as a new student, right? When it comes to tactile cues and stuff like that. So it's always good to work with other Pilates instructors on that, just so you can feel what it's like, so that the first time you get in and touch somebody isn't like during your first like full-on class, right? And you need to help somebody and you just don't have the skill set for it. But you do want to work within your scope when it comes to that. But if you've practiced, first off, practice, right? If you learn manual therapy or massage therapy, any kind of body work, then you're definitely within your scope when it comes to touching. All right, we made it to the end and then we'll have questions. But so just tips. So when you get into your class, and you're telling somebody, getting them moving. Right? You already talked about being very direct with the language and thinking them as puppets. A lot of times I'll hear teachers will be like, we are going to do this, prepare to do that, right? But you don't need to tell them to prepare to do something, just tell them to do it, right? Because they're in the class, they came to move. And unless for some reason, like say you're more in a private setting, smaller group setting, or a place where you're explaining more workshop-y through things, then you might tell somebody to prepare, be okay, to just, especially, or if there is a fall hazard or some kind of thing that could cause injury, then that might be that moment where you're telling them to prepare for something. But you don't have to tell somebody to prepare to inhale, right? They're going to inhale anyway. That's how we stay alive. So you can just say, exhale, chest lift, come up. And cue on that exhale is going to be a little more beneficial than trying to cue them to inhale, because they're going to do that anyway. And then starting off with saying, we're going to do this or we're going to do that, that visual learner for you will never move, because they are going to see, okay, well, you're telling me what to do, but when do you want me to start? So you want to be able to just get them moving. Lift your hand. Now, we're going to lift our hands. Now we're going to put our feet on the floor. Lift your hand, put your feet on the floor. Right? Real simple, easy, gets them moving. And then you can start going into all that explanation, get a little more flowery with it, right? After you get them moving. And don't get caught up in the work. It's really easy to do as a Pilates instructor, because there's, as we all know, there is so much behind each exercise. There's so many concepts and so many cues and so many like biomechanical things and ways to make people feel things and be aware. There's so much of that. They don't care. Some of them do, but like the goal, they came to move and to work out. You're the expert. They trust you and your opinion, your expertise on the movements and what you're seeing in their body and how to direct them into being able to achieve what they're doing. So that's going to say you're the expert, even though you'll definitely have those students that challenge you and act like they know everything. Well, my other teacher said blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, nothing's concrete or set in stone, right? It's like one of my clients, she's like, and then maybe in her case, she's a very tight person, but like remember one class we were squatting. So we're doing a full range squat. So all the way down, like into the malasana, like squatting all the way down, all the way to standing up during a particular exercise. This is one at the springboard. We have the springs in our hands or resistance in our hands to give us support on the way up and on the way down. And she's like, my so-and-so said that you should never squat that low. And I'm just like, well, how do you go to the bathroom when you're in the woods? Like, how do you sit on the toilet? Like, how do you sit on the sofa if you can't squat that low? So, and it's like, okay, your body can move that way. But in her mind, she was told by a particular person that you're not supposed to do that, even though she does it every day, right? Sitting on the sofa, especially if you got a low sofa on that standpoint, right? And so just learn from your students, right? It's a big takeaway here too. So watch them, learn from them, evaluate, analyze, and absorb, right, into your body. And pay attention to your warm-ups, because that's when you get to see all the magic or not happening in your students and knowing where they might be tight, weak, loose, what they can and cannot do. It's going to inform your later work that you give them during the class for sure. Right, so just using all the tools that we went over during this time. So when you're in your classes, right, tools in your toolbox, you can use your external focus of attention, your internal focus of attention. You can pick which cue you want to focus on the most during that particular exercise or your class, right? Use your action words, demonstrate, and get hands-on with your students. So you got all of those tools to be able to give a really wonderful class and keep the variety going.
So I had a question, Nicole. Thank you for all that fantastic information. It was greatly appreciated. And so my question is, I have an opportunity to potentially teach a Pilates group setting class, opposed to the one-on-ones that I've been trying to do. And it's at a gym setting. And so my question for you would be like, in order to get the clients and get the students into a position where they can pick up on your cues, understand what you're saying, would you suggest we take it through a more of a basic Pilates, breathing, core engagement, neutral spine type of thing, and show them physically?
You show them and demonstrate?
Yeah.
Well, you won't know until you see the people move, because even though it's new to you, it might not be new to them, right? So knowing that they're coming in, like especially if they're members at the gym, they're probably taking other people's classes. They've probably been moving, not their first rodeo. So but for you need to see their bodies move, right? You need to know what they're capable of. So even for me, when I go into a class, like first time out, like I'm the newbie, I still have them do all of that beginning stuff, like that first 15 minutes of my first 15 minutes of the warm up. I try to incorporate as many planes of motion as I can so that I can see what's going on. Like I automatically know, hey, you can do a chest lift. Okay, we got all kinds of other things we can add in here. And not to think about that you have, depends on how your flow, right? Of course, on what you're choosing for the class. Like if you're going to do a classical flow, or if you're going to go for get an extra creative in what you're going to do. But you not necessarily feeling like you have to reinvent the wheel or make it so extravagant. And the biggest thing I see that happens is that new teachers will put too many exercises into their flow, and they'll never get to the end of it. So because especially with large groups, you're typically going to have, and beginners, because when I say beginner, when I say beginner, I don't mean that they aren't physically capable of doing something. I meaning that this is the first time that you've seen them move, right? So this is the beginning. Is this the first Pilates class that they have in this gym?
Since the pandemic, yeah.
Right. So before the pandemic, they had Pilates. Right. Sure. So then those students are probably going to be really happy, to get in to do some Pilates. So, and who knows at that point, just starting off, maybe you have some pre-Pilates in there, have a gentle warm up, or or even if you're going through the full classical flow, you can break down the progressions. So I would definitely start with something a little bit more, let's say necessarily all pre-Pilates, but starting off more on that beginning side of the 34 exercises, and breaking those down into some progressions so that you can see, because you don't
See
know
how
their
they're
ability,
moving.
right? You don't know their
Yeah,
abilities. You don't, so you need to, you don't know if they can do a full rollover. So
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
maybe you're starting them off with like a little low belly crunch or like a little reverse crunch type thing, instead of having them go straight over. And who knows, maybe you get in that class and you call out the hundreds, and all of a sudden everybody's doing it perfectly, and you're like, oh, this
Mm-hmm,
is going to be one of
mm-hmm.
those classes where
There
we
you
get to
go.
do
That's right.
everything.
That's true.
Right,
That's true.
right.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so being prepared with more than one plan, because you don't know what I mean. And likelihood, though, since we have been in a pandemic, your students might be a little more on the deconditioned
Mm-hmm.
side.
Absolutely.
So, um, taking it slow with them. And as you know, and all of us know, with Pilates, even the simplest exercise can be challenging.
Oh, very
So,
so. Very so.
yeah. So
And can I
take it.
have my notes with me? Like just
Why
like
not? Yeah.
cue cards? Like cue
Yeah, I would
cards?
say, yeah, have something with you. So it's your first time, just to have something, right, to prompt you. Like, 'cause I don't even know, for me, sometimes I'll have like the whole, I'll just have all 34 exercises listed. So even if I don't go in the order, I will be like, okay,
Oh, I see.
we haven't done can in a long time, or whatever. I'll just have the list out, just to,
Oh, it makes
I might
sense.
quickly glance at it, and like all of, because then when you know the list and you've worked on them, you know the progressions, so you can be like, okay, we're going to do can is our going to be our big exercise that we're going to
Mm-hmm.
do today, and you're going to do all of the progressions that lead up to that one exercise, right?
Okay, and then like the following week, I can even say something like, well, we practiced the saw last week, so let's revisit that to see how you guys are feeling, or see if you guys have mastered that, so we can move on to something more advanced to kind of get them engaged, to kind of get them moving, or feel like they
um,
accomplished kind
don't
of something.
don't rush it, but I you need to see them move through as many different exercises as possible, but take it slow. Like I said, don't, who knows, in that hour, you guys might just do 10 exercises. And like I said before, you could totally do 2 sets of each exercise, just so
Oh, yeah.
one, you get to see them move. And then the second time around, you can maybe get a little deeper into the cueing and the concepts, or helping individuals when you do more than one set,
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. Yeah, because the class is only 45 minutes, so we
Hmm.
probably can get to a good 5 or 6
Hmm. And
exercise
just
with the breathing and warm up with that.
right, and then just incorporating some stuff that's going to, of course, move them in all planes of motion and stuff, and challenge them like that.
Cool,
That's good.
cool.
Hmm.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm gonna stop my share here.